Alright, let us talk about Yennefer, specifically about her personal quest and some of the drastic changes it went through during the development of The Witcher 3.
Actually, maybe you're right. A little help can go a long way.
Of course I'm right.
I have mentioned some of this in a previous video, but it was way too long and it went into so many other things, so I'd like to go a little more in-depth on this particular matter and to also discuss an interview that CDPR did for the 10th anniversary of the game. Its focus was exclusively on the development of The Last Wish. That is of course Yennefer's personal quest in the final game, and based on that interview and the wonderful documents provided to us by these gentlemen, we can really start to piece together the evolution of Yennefer's romance in The Witcher 3, and as I said, I would like to talk about it. So, the original script for the game was written in 2012, but it was in 2013 that Yennefer received a well-defined personal quest, and it was quite different from The Last Wish. First and foremost, throughout the first act of the game, Yennefer would experience these intense headaches. She would even faint at Kaer Morhen. And while we have very little concrete data, it appears that she was subjecting herself to something which ultimately led up to her personal quest in Skellige, where she would once again ask for Geralt's help, but this time, instead of looking for a djinn, she would seek out this mysterious deity called Herne the Hunter, who Yennefer believed could cure her infertility. Most mages, as you know, become infertile as a side effect of practicing magic. It causes some type of damage to their hypophysis, and as a result, they lose the ability to have children. Yennefer, however, unlike most other mages, believed that the process can be reversed. She shares that with Geralt, somewhat reluctantly, in the second Witcher book, The Sword of Destiny, where she hopes that the incredibly rare golden dragon is the key to reversing the damage. But unfortunately, it was not meant to be. Now, for those of you who have seen the Golden Dragon episode in Season 1 of the Netflix show, there is one key difference from the books. Well, there are many differences, but one in particular that concerns this topic. In the books, the dragon never says to Yennefer that it is impossible to become fertile again.
The sorceress will never regain her womb.
He only suggested that her relationship with Geralt is doomed. And in response to that, Yennefer seems to indicate that she still has hope for both her relationship and the restoration of her fertility. Now, fast forward a couple of decades and we get to the story of The Witcher 3, where apparently, for a good part of the game's development, Yennefer's quest was once again about regaining her fertility. The gentlemen I mentioned earlier speculate that CDPR had done a significant amount of work on the initial idea before changing their minds, and the 10th anniversary interview basically confirms this. CDPR say, for example, that The Last Wish was put together in the late stages of development, and that up until that point, the idea was to have a quest involving Yennefer's infertility. What's more, they even give us the reasons for changing it. And here is where I'm beginning to have some issues. The developers say that the original idea would make Yennefer appear egotistical, concerned more about herself as opposed to her relationship with Geralt, and that the quest would portray her as a rather cold person. I'd like to address the cold part first, because I think it can easily be taken out of context and misunderstood. The way it's written, it almost sounds to me as though the developers are suggesting that Yennefer appears as a cold person because she wants to cure her infertility. But I don't think that is what they're trying to say. I believe she was generally written as a colder person in the original version of the quest, simply because that's how she was written during the early stages of development. And if you've watched these lengthy videos, you'd probably agree. She was a lot more volatile, she argued more aggressively and more often with Geralt. At some point later, she was even plotting to betray the lodge and stuff like that.
You bitch! You lying bitch!
Meanwhile, if you look at the final game, especially during the Last Wish quest, you'll see that she's actually rather nice. So perhaps that is what the developers were trying to achieve. Now, my main issue stems from the other reason, the egotistical part. Here, CDPR clearly believed that the original quest would portray Yennefer in a more selfish manner, as opposed to the current one where it's all about her love for Geralt. I mostly disagree here, for two reasons. First, it's ultimately a health issue, one that has tormented Yennefer for decades at least, and I would not describe the desire to fix it as a self-centered behavior. I mean, curing any sort of personal health issue is selfish in a very literal sense, but then again, how else could it be? And the second reason is that, for Yennefer specifically, despite the fact that she is very tough, inside and out, any sort of discussion or mention of her infertility disturbs her a lot, almost unusually so. We know this from the books, and so the fact that she would put herself in such a vulnerable position in front of Geralt shows that she sees him as someone special. Or so I think. And while the infertility quest was not literally about Geralt and Yennefer's feelings for one another, it did nevertheless concern a very serious matter where their true feelings and colors could have been exposed, and it could have been very interesting to play through. Now, another angle to consider is the fact that Geralt is also infertile, and perhaps if Yennefer were to cure her own infertility, that may leave them in the awkward situation where she can have children, but only from somebody else. Of course, we mustn't forget the massive and rare Easter egg where, if you import the right save from The Witcher 2, you find a note which says that Geralt's infertility may have been cured. That is still in the game, and you can check this video about what exactly you need to do to find it. And so, the possibility for Geralt and Yennefer to actually have children with each other under the right circumstances was right there. But as it is now, this note plays absolutely no role in anything. Geralt doesn't even say a word when he finds it, so there we go. And I suppose there is another argument to be made against Yennefer's original quest. It is not something the developers have talked about, but still. So, what happens in the books is basically, early on, Yennefer is determined to regain the ability to have children, but she is not successful. However, sometime afterwards, as fate would have it, she meets Ciri, with whom she forms a very powerful bond. Eventually, the girl begins to see Yennefer as a mother, and Yennefer definitely sees Ciri as her daughter, so we could say that the meeting between Ciri and Yennefer is a kind of unexpected solution to the infertility problem, and that despite of it, Yennefer still got to have a child, in a sense. And I'm generally fine with that interpretation. However, it doesn't have to mean that Yennefer cannot still wish to cure herself. Maybe she wants to have another child, or perhaps she just wants to have the option to do it. So despite of it, I definitely think that the neighbor's dog is incredibly loud this evening. Okay, so what I meant to say is that I still think that the infertility quest could have worked, and I would have very much liked to see it. Speaking of likes, if you've been enjoying this video, consider giving it a like. But I'm not done yet. I do have one more major piece of criticism for The Last Wish, which doesn't actually have anything to do with Yennefer's fertility. And it is that the quest basically removes the sense of agency from Geralt when it comes to ending the relationship. What I mean to say is that we have no option to break up with Yennefer on our terms. We cannot tell her that we've simply grown apart, or maybe we've grown weary of her, or that we've fallen in love with Triss or somebody else, or give any sort of reason at all. All we can do is either say that we love her or accept the notion that this whole relationship has been purely the effect of magic, and now that the magic is gone, we don't feel anything for Yennefer any longer. Which I think is a truly underwhelming ending to such a lengthy and turbulent love story. The earlier versions of the game, despite all of their faults, actually included ways in which Geralt and Yennefer could naturally grow apart and simply be unable to overcome their differences of opinion when it comes to Ciri or other matters, and I loved that. And yes, I know there is the option to skip Yennefer's quest entirely and end the romance this way, but in that case Geralt tries to explain himself and Yennefer says that she doesn't want to talk about it, and that's it.
Yen, what happened back there in Skellige?
Please, Geralt. There's nothing left to say.
So it is still rather underwhelming. And on that note, I think I'm done. Do let me know what you think of a potential quest about Yennefer's infertility, the possible interactions with Geralt's infertility, and the reasons behind the changes that eventually led to the Last Wish quest, as well as my criticism for it. I'm curious to know all of it. Thank you very much for watching, special thanks to my supporters and YouTube members, and until the next video, stay tuned and be good.